Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's been only 2 weeks since the 30th anniversary of the Polish first partially free election. And over these 30 years, Polish economy has skyrocketed. We've already heard a lot of numerical data illustrating the success of Polish economy over this period of time, but I will give you a little more. This was 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth. Even during the global financial crisis, Poland did not fall into the recession. There was only one country able to reach the same result, and it was Australia. Over this period, the average year-to-year annual GDP growth was 4%. And that beats the Asian tigers like South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. Over this period, the per capita GDP grew by 381%. That translated into the increase in GDP in US dollars from 6,000 to over 31,000 per capita. At the end of 2018, Poland reported the GDP growth of over 5%, which is the first rank in Europe and one of the top positions in the world. So the question is Poland unstoppable? Are we able to continue this incredible pace of growth? Or the other way, what conditions should be met so that this pace of growth could be continued? And these are the questions to my distinguished panelists. Let's start from looking into the past. We have an author of the transformation here, Professor Marek Belka. So the first question to you, because it's impossible to talk about the future while not knowing the factors of success from the past. So in your view, what factors determined the success of Polish economy over these last 30 years?
Basically, there were two factors. One was the determination of the early reformers. They set the pace, they set the direction of reforms, and it was very easy to continue, and it was very difficult to derail the reform process, until quite recently, that is. Number two, it's the European integration. Very early in transition, as of December 1991, I remember, we committed ourselves to not just to the idea of European integration, but to adjusting or realigning our legal framework, our institutions to what has been called later acquis communautaire, the European law, which brought about civilizational change. And what is more important, or equally important, political continuity. We had scores of finance ministers, 13 prime ministers until we got to the European Union, but the direction of economic policy was maintained. So, there were two factors. One, determination of our reformers, and second, determination to integrate with the European, with Europe. Thank you.
Madam President, you as a business practitioner, what's your take on this?
Well, I think that 30 years ago, investors were coming to Poland because it was cheap, and people were just ready to start working in a global international environment. Today, the same investors remain in the country and expand because the quality of workforce is still much, much higher than you can find in similar geographies, but at the same time, although the costs increased, but they are still competitive. And the country proved that creating the business environment friendly for those last 30 years, it still gives the perspectives for expansion. So the quality of people that was discussed in a previous panel, so not to repeat, the quality of people, still the hunger for getting more and more is something that investors, foreign investors in the country really appreciate.
Thank you. Turning more to the future, the prognosis both of OECD and the European Commission forecast the decline in the GDP growth. For 2019, the forecast of GDP is about 4.2%. For 2020, it's about 3.2. President Milczarski, from your point of view, as a businessman, do you believe that this prognosis is more optimistic or rather pessimistic?
Well, I think our GDP growth is highly correlated with the GDP growth of Germany, first of all. The economies are very, very closely correlated together because of a lot of Polish exports actually go to Germany. They are our largest trading partner. So actually, I don't think it's pessimistic. I don't think it's optimistic. I hope that Poland can beat those GDP growth predictions. I would be hopeful about the internal demand generated by various social programs and some income redistribution. I think that is proving a significant stimulus for the economy as a whole. Certainly, this is something what we are seeing in aviation. GDP growth, GDP per capita growth is very largely correlated with propensity to fly. And we are seeing unparalleled trends in aviation in Central Europe, but in Poland in particular. We are one of the top 3 fastest growing markets in aviation. And I think this is a trend that will continue. Of course, there is potential doom and gloom. There is always potential shocks. Of course, what's happening in the international trade, the trade barriers, some protectionism that is starting to be clearly visible in the world is not helping the world economy. The uncertainty of Brexit and the approach of European Union towards Brexit and the impact of Brexit on the EU, I think is also giving some uncertainty. In general, people don't like to spend money in times of uncertainty. So of course, there can be still shocks, but I don't think, I think this is a realistic predictions. And I would really hope that Poland beats them. I would expect that GDP growth will be slightly higher than 3.5%, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Czyżewski, can Poland beat the prognosis of OECD and EU?
I think that there are 2 aspects. It depends. It depends on the horizon you look at and on the forces which stay beyond the economic slowdown. On one hand, I would say that the forecast looks optimistic because Poland has been growing above the potential, and the return to the potential rate of growth is something which is normal and expected. And I would remind that the budget assumption for this year is about 3.7% for the next year of growth. But on the other hand, there's a good reason and visible signs that the global economy is slowing down as well, and that refers to our trading partners. So if the global economy, in the global economy we have a large dose of uncertainty connected with US-China trade wars, Brexit, etc., and financial risk of Europe. So the question is, what will be next? Whether we will stop at 3.5 or we would, go deeper. So that's remains to be seen because we don't know. From the business perspective, for my company, we are in the energy sector and we look at the long term. So we look at the potential economic growth. We call it mid-cycle. Economists called it the potential economic growth. And I think that from that point of view, we assume that Poland can grow at the rate between 3.5 and 4 in the longer run.
Good to hear that. Mr. Mayor, I would like to rephrase this question to you because Warsaw metropolitan area always overperformed the rest of the country. So even if there is a decline in the GDP growth, do you believe that it will impact Warsaw, and how deeply it might impact Warsaw?
First of all, good afternoon. Welcome to Warsaw, everybody. Well, it depends on many factors. First of all, on the general economic weather. I mean, the Polish people and the Polish businesses proved to be extremely resilient, and even in the times of the biggest economic crisis, 2007, 8, 9, the Polish economy was growing. So I think that Polish economy will grow, regardless of whatever happens in Europe and in the world. But as we know, I mean, the economic conditions probably will worsen in the coming years, so it might be a bit tougher for us, also in the big cities. Then obviously, I mean, a lot depends on the policy of the government itself. I don't want to get overtly political, but when you ask me about prospects of Warsaw, I mean, unfortunately, now what we have in the pipeline, some of the promises that the government makes, they want to finance half of them with the money of the self-government. So, for example, 5 promises that were made by Kaczynski, they will cost Warsaw 1 billion zloty a year. So obviously, now the big question is how much of the burdens will be shifted to the shoulders of the self-governments, and that obviously will impact our possibility to grow. Another factor is Europe, and basically the money from the European budget. As we know, the cuts which are predicted are quite severe, and also the government's policy to actually severely limit money for the urban areas might impact the development of Poland and other development of Poland as such as well, because the big cities are the engines of growth, but notably in some of our big cities. So it will depend on all of those factors, but at the end of the day, Warsaw has been really growing much faster than the rest of the country. So I think that if even taking into account all of those factors, Warsaw will continue to grow and will continue to attract investment.
Thank you for this take. We heard many times here about the importance of assessment of foreign investors and the importance of foreign investment. Madam President, in your view, you worked a lot with foreign investors, you still do. What, in your view, is the current assessment of the foreign investors of Polish economy? What opportunities they see, what threats they identify?
Well, I think that foreign investors always look at the market that they enter in a long-term perspective. So, of course, having made a decision, a lot of aspects have to be assessed, taken into consideration. But at the end of the day, what matters is return on invested capital. And this capital, from the perspective of the foreign investor, is mainly money, but the return can be defined in a different way. This is how well the business can develop, what is the future for the business, and actually what is the environment for that growth. So many investors who took that risk some time ago, today, they are more than happy to take further decisions to expand. And of course, today, probably there are different challenges because, of course, external aspects have to be taken into consideration because the country is part, in a global economy, the country is part of the bigger picture. So not only what is happening in Europe, but what is also happening between Poland and other players in the globe. So, for example, in the aviation industry that I do represent today, it's so obvious that most of the output from our business is exported. So everything matters. You have to take into consideration political risks, currency risks, employment, so labor risks. Today, what we are suffering from is more and more visible lack of qualified people. And, you know, blue collars, as you may define today, this is not the same as it used to be. Blue collars today, these are very well qualified people, and with those specifics or specific needs that investors have, it's more and more difficult, and the competition among those investors is higher and higher. So what we would expect as foreign investors is, first, predictability, stability of the situation of the environment, and also we would like to know how to approach, how to manage those risks. What I mentioned, labor, access to labor forces in particular.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. President Milczarski, it's not possible to overestimate the importance of investment into economy. But some economists claim that investment that is state-financed may not finally, in the long run, contribute to the economic growth. Can you give your comment on that?
Well, I think that statement is completely taken out of context and out of perspective. Certainly investments in infrastructure are fine examples of where state involvement or state investment actually can bring very good results. I don't believe that state capital should be pushing out private capital, and the general rule that efficiency is generated by private capital is absolutely true. Undoubtedly, that's the case. For a very simple reasons, politicians, they have many more criteria, and their functions of utility are much more complex than those of private investors. But I think, you know, taking this into perspective of Poland just for the moment, you know, we are about to engage in a great project, which is the Solidarity Transportation Hub and the system of railway lines that are actually going to make this project a great intermodal, phenomenal investment that will bring amazing results for Poland, economic results. And without state involvement, that project is just not capable of materializing. It's not going to happen. So I think for real great changes in the structure of a country or in the infrastructure of a country, you actually absolutely need state involvement. And I think you know, state and private investment go hand in hand. Of course, from our point of view as an airline that will ultimately fly from Solidarity Transportation Hub. Just a little explanation. This is a global aviation hub that is going to be built in Poland. We absolutely welcome private investment because it is undoubtedly going to bring efficiency. But at the same time, to take a strategic decision like this, it requires state and requires the state credit rating. Otherwise, you cannot really bring about such an amazing change. So I think, you know, in some cases that statement is true, but in some cases it isn't, and that's my reply in short.
Thank you. Interesting comment anyway. Continuing on the investments, but thinking about future these days, you have to think about ecology. Mr. Czyżewski, Poland, according to the EU scorecard on eco-investments, was on the last third position for more than 9 years. Why do you believe, where is the reason behind that, and what should be done to improve on that?
Okay. I think that, you know, the main reason is that eco-investments, they're, you know, cannot be produced in a garage. You know, they need some context, real installation, to test a lot of cooperation with so-called fintech, not fintechs, but startups which originate from science, from research, etc. And we now see the results of something which has been done, let's say, 10 years ago. And in this area, we actually were not very active. Why? Because, Poland, for a long time, since beginning of transition, experienced, with a good success, a model of development through modernization, which means that we simply imported, foreign technologies, technologies which are which were tested. Therefore we gain a lot, modernizing our economy, but in the meantime we lost the ability or possibility to develop our own technologies. Now this growth through modernization is about to expire, and we have to change the model of our economic development. And we are already in the developed and high-income country. We also are 23rd or 24 countries by GDP in the world. But if we want to stay in this group, we have to really develop like this group, which means through innovations, through innovations which are global, world scale, not local. And where this innovation potential should be, we should look at. I mean, in general, everywhere, but in particular, when we look at the structure of our economy, if we take 10 top Polish enterprises, 8 of them are in commodity sector. And 7 out of these 8 are in energy sector. And so we have to really develop eco-innovation in this sector because it's a big pressure, regulatory pressure, but also this real pressure which comes from megatrends. So, why we should do it? Because these companies are biggest employers at our map. My company employs 22,000 people, and research shows that for every person employed directly, there are 7 persons employed outside. So there's a big responsibility. But except of this responsibility, there is a obligation that we have to do it because of this global megatrends, but we also have the, enablers, which means that advances in technology, etc. The road is not easy.
I would like, sorry.
3 sentences. Yeah, we have to work really on the technology. I think that the main now obstacle is to break the risk barrier, because if you operate with technologies that are proved, taken from the market, there's a different type of risk. When you have to develop your technologies, you first fail, and you have to take this failure on your chest, because otherwise, you would never succeed. So we have to learn how to really operate in this new world, but I'm quite optimistic because we do a lot in this area.
Thank you for this point. I wanted to change the perspective a bit from a business perspective to a more authority perspective. So the question to Mr. Mayor, there is a political theorist, Benjamin Barber, who suggests that these days the local government is much more better adjusted to combat the challenges of reality. Do you observe the shift of powers from the nation state to the local government, and do you believe that the local government may attract business and stimulate economy more than the state one?
Well, I would submit to you that one of the secret of our successes is that we were actually able to devolve power to the local government, which created a certain sense of ownership among the people, because generally local politicians are much more popular among the voters, and it created a certain sense of credibility. And I hope that this trend will be continued. That's why we actually proposed certain postulates to deepen the responsibility of the local government. Unfortunately, now we can observe exactly a tendency to reverse that trend and to centralize government, which I think would be a calamity for the Polish political system and for the Polish economy as such. Because as I said, I mean, if we look around, I mean, the strength of the local government also contributed to the incredible growth of our country. Why? Because, I mean, and when it comes to attracting investment, because we are much closer to the people, we listen, we are much more responsive to the needs, we are much more flexible, and obviously all of these, and rational, and all of these factors contribute to our government being able to much more quickly react to the changing circumstances and to be much more attuned to the needs of the people, which always benefits the decision-making process. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is the feeling of ownership, that people can actually identify with the decisions taken by the local government, as we have much more participation. You know, we do have much more consultation, participatory budget, and so on and so forth. And all of that simply strengthens the credibility of the government also vis-a-vis the investors.
Thank you for this take. And the final question to Professor Belka, maybe a bit theoretical one, but in my view with an important practical impact. In the Western countries to which Poland was supposed to catch up, we can observe a kind of a crisis of capitalism. The signs of that being rising state deficit, the income distributional conflict, also the increasing disparity in wealth. Do you believe that the goals that were set against the Polish economies in the 90s of 21st century are still valid, or the goals and directions into which Polish economy should go should be redefined?
Well, you mentioned the crisis or the sense of disappointment or fatigue in the most advanced, developed, most modern countries. And this is due to a phenomenon, a mega trend that has basically prepared the economy in the last decades, which is globalization. But globalization, apart from huge benefits that it brought to the humankind, it also resulted in some unexpected consequences, especially for advanced countries. Try to think that China, India, are these days the champions of globalization. Not the US, not Western Europe, because there are losers, and those losers from globalization are not in China, not even in Africa. There were always losers in Africa. But these are parts of societies, of the most modern, most advanced societies. Something must have gone wrong there, in the model of development, in the model of education, in the model of labor mobility, that made these countries vulnerable. Well, now about Poland. We have benefited from globalization on every account. But some people sometimes bitterly remark, some people in Western Europe bitterly remark about Poland that we are like a small China. Toute proportion gardée. We are in a situation that we have only benefited from globalization so far. As we approach the advanced world, we are also becoming vulnerable to these unexpected consequences of globalization. And this is probably the biggest challenge that we are facing as a country.
Thank you. Very interesting point, very interesting comment. The last question to Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask about the engines of the Polish economy as a closing question for the panel. What do you believe is the strongest side of the Polish economy these days?
It's always the people. It's basically the inhabitants of our cities who are always dynamic. They are craving for success after so many years where our energy was stifled, and that are actually able to think out of the box and fix the problem. Everyone, you know, I've been working in the European Union institutions for years. Normally people love to work with the Germans because everything is planned, everything works fine, and it's true. But when there is a problem, you call a Pole because he will actually fix your problem. Think in a flexible way, and that's also why they love Polish plumbers in Britain. A Polish plumber will also fix your electricity and take care of your kids if there's a need.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention and being with us last 40 minutes. Please join me in giving applause to the distinguished panel.